Paul Laxalt has in mind, we will find out in the next few minutes.
I'm here proudly to nominate Ronald Reagan for the office of President of the United States.
Well, I don't know how much of this convention is going to be able to endure or take. Mrs. Ford seems to be leaving her box at the moment as the Reagan demonstration continues. Ronald Reagan with his choice for the vice presidential ticket, Richard Schweiker of Pennsylvania, senator from Pennsylvania. Schweiker was named as Reagan's running mate by the candidate 3 weeks ago. It was a controversial choice. It was made to bring in delegates from the northeastern part of the United States. Brought some, but not as many as believed was hoped. And today, under some suggestions from southern delegates we've been led to believe, Senator Schweiker offered to Reagan to drop out of the race. Governor Reagan told him absolutely not, that when he picked him, they were a team, and they would go down as a team if that's the way it had to be. Our delegate poll indicates that's the way it has to be. It appears that Ronald Reagan will be defeated tonight when the voting takes place. This is now a 5-minute demonstration, 21 minutes before, and we've had 26 minutes of Reagan demonstration so far. Incidentally, the Ford demonstration was cut off there at about 15 minutes before. So on the battle of demonstrations, at least at this point, it would appear that the Reagan forces are winning. We've had some indication from our floor reporters and from the podium, as a matter of fact, that this is another example of the Ford people who do control the convention machinery, leaning over backwards to try to not antagonize the Reagan people, an effort to keep the bridges open to unity in the party after this convention is over, and they are not forcing a closure of these Reagan demonstrations. That would seem to be indicated since the Ford demonstration ended earlier than the Reagan demonstration the last time around. And now Paul Laxalt continues.
May we have some quiet, please? It would be appreciated. May I say this in behalf of Governor Reagan and myself at the outset. We're both extremely interested, of course, in the candidacy. But we're first both Republicans. And let me assure you tonight that regardless of how these cards fall tonight, that Ronald Reagan and Paul Laxalt will work firmly behind the ticket. Let me tell you for a moment or two why I support Ronald Reagan and have from the beginning. I first met this man in 1964 in the Goldwater campaign and was greatly impressed by his speech, which was one of the great political masterpieces of our time. I then observed as a neighboring governor this man running as a citizen politician for governorship of the state of California. He took over the most complex set of problems that anybody could ever conceive, and I appreciated that particularly, being a governor myself. He took over a state that was dead-ridden. He took over a state that was hopelessly morassed in welfare problems. He took over a state in which the campuses were in total turmoil. Very quickly upon taking office, he brought into Sacramento businessmen and people throughout California qualified to answer and analyze government and took appropriate action. Within 8 years, this man returned to the people of the state of California billions of dollars in tax rebates, and believe me, that's refreshing these days. During that same period, he instituted a comprehensive welfare program, drastically reduced the welfare rolls in California, yet benefiting increasingly those who needed it, establishing a model in this country that all the states wish to copy and the Congress should as well. He left his successor, Jerry Brown, a surplus of some $500 million. In fact, he left the state of California in such good shape that Jerry Brown has been hassling Jimmy Carter all this year, and that's not all bad. And I must admit, although I observed this firsthand, I didn't truly appreciate Ronald Reagan until I came here to Washington. I had a suspicion that the real pros, the real heavyweights in this business, lived and worked along the banks of the Potomac. But boy, was I mistaken. I found in Washington a bureaucracy that runs the affairs of the people of this country and not the Congress and not the cabinet and not even the presidency. When I am the type of fellow who believes that the people of this country, through the elected representatives, should run the affairs of this country and not an unelected bureaucracy. I found bureaucrats regulating the small businesses of this country who'd never met a payroll and who didn't have the least idea of knowing how to regulate a small business. I found no real appreciation in all of Washington that the real strength of this country lies not in big government, but lies in the private enterprise sector of the United States. I found nobody in Washington who's better capable of running our schools in this country than the representatives within the local school districts. I saw fiscal insanity that's absolutely mind-boggling. I've been told that a $700 billion deficit is no great problem, and yet I wonder what we're doing to the generations that follow. What I'm saying is this: the more that I saw in Washington, the more I appreciated Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, in addition to qualification, brings an essential ingredient to his candidacy. He's independent of the Washington scene. He has the type of independence that's going to permit him to come to that town, trim back that bureaucracy, and more important, whip that irresponsible Congress into line. An essential consideration of all of us as Republicans should be, which of the candidates is more electable? In my opinion, there is no more effective political campaigner in this country than Ronald Reagan. Now, when I say that, that's not merely rhetoric. We have a track record to establish it. Several months ago, he took on the incumbency and the White House and the whole bit. We had within our camp in the whole Congress some 9 people out of 535. We had hardly anybody in the National Committee, hardly anybody in elected office throughout the country. But we did have the people, and that made the difference, and that's why we're here. Let me tell you this. I've been with Ron and Nancy Reagan for these last several months all over this country. And I would venture to say that nobody who's ever campaigned for President of the United States worked harder or more effectively than Ron and Nancy Reagan. There's been a great deal of discussion during the last few weeks about presidential debates, and presidential debates there will be. And I would dearly love to see Ronald Reagan debate Jimmy Carter. I'll bet you this, that after about one round of debating with Ron Reagan, Jimmy Carter would go back shucking peanuts, if that's what you do with peanuts. Lastly, let me say this. We have a rare opportunity as Republicans tonight. We have the opportunity, in my judgment, to elect and nominate the finest Republican candidate that's hit a Republican convention in recent years, Ronald Reagan.
Here is the what might be called official Reagan demonstration. And those frisbee-type whirling discs the Reagan people put out are being flung through the hall as the band strikes up California, Here We Come. Maybe that's not quite the tune for Ronald Reagan forces tonight. It was really Washington to which Ronald Reagan intended to be going from Kansas City. They're parading in the aisles. Snake dance has begun. They're going to be, it was said, allowed 15 minutes for this demonstration. They went 21 or 22 minutes earlier tonight before the official demonstration ever got started. We'll see how this one goes. But for the first time, we see the parading in the aisles that has become traditional at political conventions when there is really some spirit to them, as there is this year, for quite a change at this Republican National Convention. It's certainly easy to tell how evenly divided these delegates are. It has been a touch-and-go battle. Ronald Reagan has put up quite a fight for his cause, for his purpose. He got within just a few votes of enough to put him over the top. In the test vote last night, he failed. Test vote on a rules change, which would have forced President Ford to name his vice presidential candidate, even as Ronald Reagan had named his a couple of weeks ago. Enthusiastic Reagan crowd in the Kemper Arena. There's Mrs. Reagan. The Republican National Convention coverage by CBS News will resume after this message. The Reagan demonstration on for 3 or 4 minutes now, and it's likely to go on for at least 10 minutes more and maybe far beyond that. They're dancing in the aisles, parading in the aisles, waving their banners, blowing the horns, and you're privileged to watch by the miracle of television. Reagan demonstration goes on and on and on. As my colleague Morton Dean said, and this is the silent majority. The Republican National Convention coverage by CBS News will resume after this message.
CBS News continues its special report, Campaign 76. Tonight, the fourth session of the Republican National Convention from the Kemper Arena in Kansas City. This portion sponsored by the people of Ford Motor Company on behalf of Ford and Lincoln Mercury dealers. Ford wants to be your car company. Now here again is Walter Cronkite.
Nevada's Senator Paul Laxalt, the chairman of the Reagan Presidential Campaign Committee, 10 minutes ago put his man's name into nomination before the delegates to this Republican National Convention. And since then, the Reagan supporters have been demonstrating here, as one would expect. They've got a couple of more minutes of band music allotted to them before the chair will try to quiet them down and get back to the continuing nominating business of this convention. Mrs. Ford and her family left their exposed box just above the arena floor a little while ago and went up a few steps up to one of the glass enclosed boxes, and presumably she is still there and is able to watch the demonstration for her husband's rival. the challenger who has come closer to unseating an incumbent president for his party's nomination than any man since it was done successfully in 1884. We reported just a little while ago our CBS News delegate poll with the voting just not very far away has finally gotten down to only 2 uncommitted votes, and our total shows 1,189 votes tonight for President Ford and 1,060 for Governor Reagan, with 2 undetermined. One of those is an uncommitted vote that must be cast by law as uncommitted from North Carolina. The other is Eliza Sprinkle from Bristol, Virginia. She still hasn't made up her mind according to our poll. Of course, it's quite possible that Ms. Sprinkle just isn't telling us. The music has stopped. The 15 minutes allotted for music is up. Dan Rather, the repertorial bird dog that he is, has come up with an interesting fact tonight. He says that the floor demonstrations to be staged for the Ford nomination for his supporters were planned with the advice of former Nixon aide Dwight Chapin. Dwight Chapin was the man who did that job for Nixon in 1972 and 68, but then he was one of those who fell in the Watergate scandals and was sentenced to 10 months for lying to a grand jury in the Watergate case. He's now on the payroll of W. Clement Stone, the big payroll, the big backer of the Nixon campaigns, who told Mike Wallace last night that he thought he'd probably put up about $5 million for various Nixon campaigns. Quite a hunk of change. Chapin has been consulted regularly, according to Dan, by the Ford campaign organizers, although Dan says there's no indication that Dwight Chapin is in Kansas City now. It has been noted that there are no balloons here, as there were in 1972. Dan suggests that's because of the resemblance to the 72 campaign for Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon is a non-person at this convention. His name has not been mentioned from the podium. There are no pictures of him in the hall. The one reference to him praising his China policy was removed from the draft of the platform by the platform committee. Bruce Morton on the podium right now is in the middle of all of this demonstration. Bruce?
I was going to say, Walter, this is the eye of the storm, so to speak. I ought to tell you that this demonstration is officially over. I ought to tell you that because you'd never know it from looking at it. Senator Paul Laxalt, the man who nominated Governor Reagan, came by a minute or two ago and said, I don't know how we're going to do on the vote, but I'm pretty sure we've won the demonstration. And I suspect he may be right about that. Just down here in front of the podium, there's a mob of people sort of clustered with big signs and banners, as I think you can see. The reason, I believe, Walter, is that there are 2 television pool cameras here, and I think a lot of the demonstrators don't realize that there are other cameras higher up all around the hall that can see them. They've spotted these 2, and they're planted here with a big assortment of Reagan banners so that they want to be sure they'll be seen. At any rate, this is going on and on. The end is not in view. And there are just absolutely no signs at all of stopping. John Rhodes has tried once to bang his gavel, but the plastic horns in this hall make so much noise that I doubt if the demonstrators could hear it even if they wanted to, and it's more or less for sure that they don't want to just yet. Their unofficial demonstration, Walter, went on, as I think you said, just over 20 minutes, 21, 22 minutes. This one looks like beating that fairly easily. Walter?
Bruce, one of the mysteries we've been trying to solve around here is where those plastic horns actually came from. I mean, we know that they were distributed free to the delegates as they entered the hall tonight indiscriminately. Reagan and Ford people both were offered them. It's something of a mystery. Who thought that was a good idea? that they were trying to drum up enthusiasm at this convention, it hardly seemed necessary. As a matter of fact, as John Rhodes, the chairman, said from the podium not very long ago, stop acting like a Democrat convention. But somebody thought that the horns were a good idea, and there they are.
I don't know what it proves, Walter. It may be that the Reagan people are more musical, or at least more horn-prone. Their demonstrations seem to rely on them more than the Ford demonstrations do. You wonder, the Democrats got a bad name in 1972 for staying up late at night and arguing. I don't know what this looks like on the home screen, but whatever it looks like, there's an awful lot of it this evening.
You can say that again, but don't, Bruce.
Anyway, you can hear it, and it is going on. Here's John Rhodes again.
There really isn't any practical way, Bruce, is there, for the command structure to stop a thing like this. The sergeant-at-arms aides are Burns, I believe they are Burns, aren't they, detective people? But they're mostly young girls and a few young men. They're not policemen in any sense of the word. And as a matter of fact, they were told when they took the jobs that there would be no physical contact in any way with these various delegates at any time. They really can't do very much about it, can they?
No, this is, on the one hand, it's all perfectly friendly and nobody's angry at anybody. On the other hand, it is, in fact, out of control, and that the people in charge of this convention cannot, short of, I suppose, calling in the genuine police, do anything about this, and they don't want to do anything that would rub tempers as raw as that. So this demonstration will go on for as long as the demonstrators want it to. The ushers you talked about are here, but there aren't very many of them. Some of them are young women, some of them, as you say, are middle-aged or elderly people. They're not about to start pushing these delegates back towards their seats.
Bruce, Barry Seraphin, as you know, has been covering the Reagan campaign, and he's been down in Governor Reagan's suite while he watched the convention. Barry, what's the scene inside the candidate's suite?
Walter, the scene inside that suite is in striking contrast to the kind of pandemonium you're seeing down there at the hall. We were in there for, perhaps 15 or 20 minutes during the time that Senator Laxalt was making the nomination speech. Governor Reagan was watching that speech with Senator Schweiker. Both men, I thought, were very quiet. Governor Reagan was particularly grim in appearance, intent on watching. Very few smiles. He would smile occasionally when a picture of his wife, Nancy, would come on the screen. But for the most part, tight-lipped, a man who didn't look like he was enjoying this evening at all. Senator Schweiker smiled a little more, even nodded his head in time to the music during the demonstration a little bit. But the scene was very much in contrast to the one you've got down there. Reagan aides up there on the same hotel floor are making the kind of jokes that you find in moments like this, sort of dark humor. They're talking about this campaign in the past tense to a large degree. And I think that Governor Reagan, his aides describe him as a realist. I think that as a realist, he doesn't expect this to go anywhere tonight. It struck me that it was a particularly tough moment at times during Senator Laxalt's speech, when the senator was talking about the possibility of Ronald Reagan, for example, debating Jimmy Carter, the things that I suspect Reagan does not expect to be able to do, and he was particularly grim at those kind of moments. Walter.
Barry, thank you. You may have wondered why we have been seeing Governor Reagan in his suite, but not President Ford in his. Well, it turns out that quite a little contretemps has occurred because of that. The Ford people are not letting television into the suite at the Crown Center Hotel. They did invite up a couple of pool reporters, and then when that started a little bit of a fuss among other reporters who weren't invited, they invited the AP and the UPI press services to send a man, or a reporter each, And both the press services said no, they thought that was discriminatory, that unless television, radio, and other areas of the media could be represented there, they wouldn't go. And they haven't gone, and that's the way it stands right at the moment. If there are any further reports, Bob Pierpoint, who is down there and hoping to get in with microphone and camera, will let us know. We'll be back in 1 minute with more CBS News coverage of the Republican National Convention. Well, it's 25 minutes now that this demonstration for Ronald Reagan has been going on after Senator Laxalt put his name into nomination. There was a 22-minute demonstration earlier tonight, so if my arithmetic is correct, that's 47 minutes that the Reagan people have been demonstrating this evening in 2 sections. And we haven't even gotten to the seconding speech for Reagan as yet. That's supposed to be quite a stem winder by Senator Jesse Helms of North Carolina, leader of the independent conservative forces, as he calls it, a man around whom many of the conservatives would like to organize an extra effort, maybe a third party even. He said he would have no part of that earlier today. He said he was sticking with the 2-party system. But he's got quite a speech. We saw an advanced copy of it, and it is indeed one that should again excite this Reagan crowd. Whether this sort of thing influences any votes is highly doubtful. Demonstrations have in the past when well, perhaps the delegates weren't quite as sophisticated as they are in the present day. Also, when there were more than simply 2 candidates and there was a lot of maneuver and many ballots, then demonstrations kind of indicated who was for whom, who was leaning. There was a lot of the business of grabbing banners for the states and pushing them into a parade, indicating that a state was beginning to swing over to one candidate or another. But that sort of thing doesn't count anymore, particularly when you've got simply a 2-man race, as this one has turned out to be. And what a race. Interesting sign, a little bit of philosophy. Highly unlikely, as close as this race has been, that this demonstration is going to get any of that 102 delegate or 120 delegate difference that we have in our CBS News poll to swing over to Reagan. Our last delegate count, which came in just a couple of hours ago, now accounts for all but 2 of the delegates to this convention. 1,189 now for President Ford and 1,068 for Reagan. 2 undetermined.
Citizen, the state of North Carolina, to second the nomination.
John Rhodes is going ahead and calling on Senator Helms for his talk and hoping that that may silence the crowd.
I recognize the very distinguished Jesse Helms of North Carolina. And will you please be quiet so you can hear Senator Helms speak? Senator Helms.
This prolonged demonstration, whether intended to do so or not, is having the effect, and has had the effect, of pushing the Ford nomination and the demonstration for Ford way off of prime television time in the eastern states. That television prime time ended about 12 minutes ago at 11 o'clock Eastern time. This is now what is called marginal time, or D time, or whatever they do call it. Anyway, it's not prime time. Dan Rather is in the middle of probably the loudest particular state delegation, the Texas delegation. Dan?
Well, Walter, I think if there's any one delegation that epitomizes this convention, at least for the Reagan forces, it has to be the Texas delegation. Solidly for Reagan, have been from the day they got here, absolutely committed, 3 deep to Reagan, not going to change under any circumstances. They've had themselves a terrific time, but they're really not bitter or frustrated. Now, they've been down here jitterbugging, singing. They've been leading this very long demonstration, and among them, Michael Halbooty, who is probably one of the best fundraisers that Ronald Reagan has had, particularly among oil men. Michael Halbooty, it's all over for you, isn't it? In real terms, Reagan's lost it.
Well, of course, we haven't voted yet.
No, but he's out of it, and you know it, and I know it.
Well, it looks bad, but still, on the other hand, well, I hope a miracle will happen.
Now, if a miracle doesn't happen, you were telling me earlier, you thought that John Sears made at least 2 critical mistakes. What were those mistakes that you were talking about? What might have been?
I think that the first mistake, which I would like to call a blunder, you know, I can forgive a man for a mistake, but it's hard for me to forgive a man for a blunder. And I think that he made the greatest blunder, political blunder of the 20th century when he recommended Schweitzer to Reagan that early. Reagan shouldn't have had anybody until after he was nominated.
And what was the second blunder?
And the second one, when he made us vote on that situation last night, C-16, because that was a test vote. There was a lot of uncommitted delegates that would have probably voted for Reagan tonight. But they didn't like that C-16, and they didn't want any part of it. Consequently, they voted against it, and by voting against it, they voted for Ford, and they'll probably stick with Ford tonight.
But you're having a good time anyway.
Sure, I'm having a good time, but in any event, I'm a Republican, and whoever wins, we got to go.
Walter?
Okay, Dan, those Texans held their own rally outside this hall a little earlier tonight. They had expected to get... that lady lost her sign. And Nelson Rockefeller didn't even take it away from her. The Texans met outside the hall here to have a rally. They expected a band to show up, which didn't apparently, but they went ahead and held the rally anyway. In a huge football-type huddle, they sang Eyes of Texas, raised Cain outside the hall before marching in the body. They've got a neat little gimmick going in the hall earlier, they did, before this long demonstration began. Their delegates down on the floor and their alternates up in the first tier of seats alternately cheer, returning one another's cheers, best of football style. It is a very noisy delegation, but as Dan says, apparently a very happy one. Morton Dean is down there with Vice President Rockefeller. Morton, has the Vice President taken any Reagan signs out of this demonstration?
Mr. Vice President, could you stand up? He's just offered me some popcorn that he's been eating here, and he's been pelted by confetti and surrounded by signs that say, "Rocky, don't steal my sign," which relates to an incident yesterday when Mr. Rockefeller allegedly pulled down a sign and got into a little bit of a shouting match. What is that, Mr. Vice President, or shouldn't I ask?
This is beer.
Beer?
From a Reagan delegate in North Carolina. One of my friends from last night brought it to me.
Well, that must mean that you've made up after what happened down here last night.
Friends.
What do you make of? Have you ever seen anything quite like this? You've been going to conventions from...
I think they're going to get worn out.
They're also forcing Mr. Ford to put over his nominating speeches into time that is not exactly prime television time. Do you think that matters?
The important thing is that he got the nomination. The rest is unimportant.
And there's no question in anyone's mind that that is going to happen tonight.
Well, as I said all afternoon whenever I was asked, this is a time one has to be very careful.
Why is that?
Well, because you never know. See, now, nobody knew what was going to happen tonight. So that you can expect any kind of trick And therefore, all of the Ford supporters are going to be on their toes. And this is all, you know, exciting and wonderful. But the thing that counts is the nomination itself.
I must quote my colleague Roger Mudd, who said, perhaps this is the ultimate John Sears trick. They're not going to let you people vote.
Well, he underestimates our patience and determination.
Okay, Governor, it looks as if, I keep calling you Governor, but you were Governor longer than your Vice President. Okay.
My security blanket.
Nelson Rockefeller.
Good to see you.
Walter, good to see you.
Mort, I don't suppose there's any chance, no, there isn't any chance really, that you could ever tire out an entire half of a convention and get some of them to go home and leave empty seats when the balloting began. That's one reason they have alternates, of course. For every delegate, there is an alternate, and obviously that tactic could just never really work. Convention sessions have lasted a lot longer than this one is going to last, even if the Reagan people keep this up half the night. We had a session in 1952, I think it was, at the Democratic Convention that went, I don't know, we were on the air 16 hours. I don't remember whether the demonstration actually lasted, whether the convention session actually lasted that long, but it did last into the wee hours of the morning. Maybe this one is going to do the same thing. This particular demonstration has been going on now for over 35 minutes. It was supposed to have been cut short at 15, but you see that the convention managers have no control over this Reagan crowd here in Kemper Arena in Kansas City. The Republican National Convention coverage by CBS News will resume after this message. Well, it seems that political convention demonstrations have some kind of a life of their own. Unfortunately, perhaps, in some cases, it's too long a life. At any rate, they're very difficult things to cover. No yardage is gained. The ball isn't passed from one person to another. No sides change. They're just out there doing their thing. There's an interesting story, incidentally, tonight we might report, while we seem to have more time than we would like. The Children's Express, it's a newspaper with a staff of 13, aged 9 to 16, is going to press, we're told tonight, with a report that Senator Baker will be President Ford's running mate. Now, you better not laugh over that report, because if you remember, that's the same bunch of kids who scooped everybody at the Democratic National Convention in New York last month by naming Senator Mondale as Governor Carter's running mate 3 days before Governor Carter revealed that name to the rest of us. They said they put that together by the deductive methods after talking to the children of a lot of people involved, a lot of political leaders. One of the facts that they put together in their deduction was that when Senator Muskie went down to see Governor Carter at Plains, Georgia, to talk about the vice presidency, that the good senator from Maine left Plains quite angry because it seemed that Governor Carter talked not about Muskie, but about Mondale during their whole visit. That was their principal fact they used. So maybe the Children's Express has something, and Howard Baker is the man. That wouldn't be quite such a surprise here, perhaps, as the Mondale selection was, because Baker is the odds-on favorite around Kansas City, I think, tonight, among the Republican delegates as the man who Ford will select, not necessarily their favorite for the job, but the odds-on betting favorite of the one who will be picked. The Reagan floor leaders, identified by their green hats, are still working the floor up to the last minute. Leslie Stahl has a report for us.
Walter, I'm standing here with Michael Hughes, who is more or less acting as a cheerleader here on the floor. There are some charges, Mike, that this whole thing is being perpetuated purposely to keep the nomination off primetime television. Is there any truth to that?
I haven't heard a single thing about that, to tell you the truth.
Well, you've been a cheerleader, and this demonstration was only supposed to last 15 minutes. I saw you marching groups of people around the floor. Why are you perpetuating this? Why is it going on so long?
So I want Governor Reagan to be our next president. I think if we might be able to convince some delegates to switch for him by a long demonstration.
Have you, do you have a central organizer who's telling you to keep this up?
No, we don't have anybody calling the people on the floor. We have a few walkie-talkies around, but I don't know where they are.
Has anybody told you to try and calm the crowd down?
No. Why should we? We love it.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Walter.
Thank you, Leslie. So it sounds as if the Reagan people don't intend to cease this demonstration, although it has been going on for almost 40 minutes now. There was supposed to be 15. Mike Wallace is with a well-known Reagan delegate who, I gather, Mike, has had enough of these demonstrations?
Walter, I'm with a Reagan delegate from California. You know him well. His name is Pat Boone, and he understands all about prime time. But I think that Pat Boone thinks that the thing has gone on long enough. Is that accurate?
I thought that about a half an hour ago, Mike.
Well, what is the point? Now, look, you're a Reagan man. You're a California delegate.
That's right. I worked very hard,
And yet, you're against this...
Yeah, I don't think this makes any sense because, you know, it's fine. A big display of enthusiasm, that's one thing, but now I think we're postponing the inevitable, and that may be part of what the problem is. I think a lot of folks are not too sure of the outcome, and they're sort of wanting to postpone it, put it off. You know, it's our last hurrah, really. I don't feel that it is. I have a sort of a cautious optimism about the vote, and I want to get on with it. We got real business to do at the convention, and I think we're just sort of, well, it's like people crowding into a phone booth or a Volkswagen or swallowing goldfish. It's just, it's gone beyond any kind of sensible limit.
The suggestion is made, Pat, that what people have in mind in the Reagan organization is keep it going past prime time so that the Ford demonstrations and the Ford nomination speeches and so forth will go on 1, 2, or 3 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast.
Well, I hope that's not true. I mean, I hope that this is not a planned thing. I really hope it's not, because it works against the Republican Party. It works against the American people, I think, just because the people want to know, they want to see, and I don't want them to turn off and watch a late movie.
Yeah. Even if it's one of yours.
Even if it's one of mine.
Why don't you just go on up the stairs? Nancy Reagan is sitting up there, and tell her to talk to her husband.
I don't think she's in touch with him right now. I've seen a lot of our floor leaders really trying to get everybody to sit down. I think a lot of this really was a spontaneous thing on the part of delegates who are probably here for the first, and they sense perhaps only time in their lives, and they're just wanting to prolong it.
It does begin to look as though at least your delegation is beginning to sit down, Pat.
Jesse Helms has been trying to speak for a long time to second the nomination, and I've been suggesting that we sit down, but every time I sit down, I get hit in the head with a sign and dumped confetti on, and I just don't think it's accomplishing anything.
All right, Pat, I'm going to let you sit down.
Okay.
And Walter, you sitting down?
Mike, you know that Jesse Helms is starting his speech. We're going to listen. He's going to start regardless.
To trust them, let me mention only briefly a friend of mine who offers far better advice that has endured the callous aberrations of man for 2,000 years. My friend's name is Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and his advice is that we place our trust in God and not in politicians. To lift our eyes above selfish and petty personal ambition, and that we dedicate ourselves to total resistance to those at home and abroad who would discard the very meaning of the miracle of America and who would allow tyranny to march forward under the flag of compromised principle. Now, I, for one, am proud that the United States Senate voted unanimously to confer honorary U.S. citizenship upon Alexander Solzhenitsyn.